Of all the videos on Star Wars that I've done thus far, this has been the hardest one for me to do. Not because I don't like giving criticism to this franchise that I love so dearly, and I will do a fair bit of that here, but because more so than any of my other videos, these will just be more or less my opinions. And when it comes right down to it, my opinions matter no more or less than your own. As I've said before, Star Wars can mean different things to different people. You're no more or less of a fan for liking or not liking certain aspects of it, or maybe not even liking a certain film in the franchise. With that being said, let me start off by saying that I liked The Force Awakens, though I can certainly understand why there are many people that didn't. To me, on its own, it was a fun, action-packed movie that played homage to the original Star Wars, maybe a bit too much so. Okay, way too much so. And although it was good and a fun movie in its own right, it was supposed to be the next chapter in a larger story, but instead it felt like a rehash of previous chapters, and one of the main plots of the movie, to destroy Starkiller Base, felt like it was thrown in there just to be a little more than a backdrop to introduce these new characters on. And speaking of those new characters, that's actually what I liked the most about the movie, much to my surprise. Which, in a strange way, is disappointing when you consider I'd been waiting for over 30 years to see the characters from the original trilogy on screen again, and to know what had become of them since the end of Return of the Jedi. And unfortunately, I'm not sure I was happy to learn what had become of the big three, meaning of course Han, Luke, and Leia. And yes, I of course realize that in order to make a sequel trilogy, to some extent the happy ending seen at the end of the original trilogy had to be undone. You can't make an omelet without breaking some eggs, as the saying goes, and you can't make a new trilogy without adding some conflict into the lives of our favorite characters. No one is going to be happy if you make 3 movies about how they all lived happily ever after. Well, some would, but in general, a lot of people wouldn't be happy. I also realized that so far, we've only seen the first part of this new trilogy, and have only seen a teaser trailer for the second part, so it's hard to know exactly how the story is all going to play out in the end, but that doesn't mean I can't, at this point already, question some of the decisions they've made in regards to handling some of the very icons of Star Wars itself, again meaning our big 3 heroes, Han, Luke, and Leia. Because in The Force Awakens we learned that Han and Leia not only didn't work out, but they also failed as parents, and in response they simply reverted back to who they were at the start of the original trilogy. All the growth and change that they showed in those first 3 movies is completely gone 30 years later, and Han's journey from a selfish smuggler to a for-the-cause rebellion general who loved Leia has been completely undone, and he's once again just a smuggler on his own, trying to swindle everyone else in the galaxy, with Chewie at his side of course. And in the end, he dies tragically at the hands of a son he'd failed, sent to that fate by none other than Leia herself. And speaking of Leia, her story of how she went from a devoted leader who denied herself from feeling any emotions that might get in the way of her duty, to fall in love with a man who was her exact opposite, has also been undone by splitting her away from Han and making her the leader of the Resistance. They even both say in the movie that when things got bad and they lost their son to the dark side, they just went back to what they were good at. How awesome was that to learn after 30 some years? And yes, there's already been a lot of clues that Han and Leia weren't completely to blame, if at all, for what had happened to their son. That Snoke had been manipulating Ben from the shadows all along, and we may even see that alluded to further as the trilogy goes on. Which makes me question the decision to separate Han and Leia in the first place. Couldn't they have just clearly blamed the whole thing on Snoke, who is likely some very powerful dark side entity, and let us the audience know that they failed because there was just nothing they could do to save Ben from Snoke? That even their very best efforts didn't work? And couldn't the loss of their son to the dark side instead have strengthened Han and Leia's relationship and the resolve to find Luke so that maybe he could bring their son back? Instead of ignoring what had happened to Ben and going back to what they were good at, wouldn't they do everything they can to save their son? Personally, I don't see why Han and Leia couldn't have still been very much together in The Force Awakens, and both fighting for the Resistance after what had happened to their son. You could have even changed how it all played out, and had Leia ask Han to go to Jakku after Poe failed to report in about the map to Luke. And once Han gets there, he encounters Rey and Finn, and they escape from the First Order together. They could have then skipped over the whole scene with the Rathtars, even though I didn't mind it, I know a lot of people didn't like it, and then gone straight to Maz Kanata's castle. And why would they go there? Well, not to get BB-8 on a clean ship, which didn't make a lot of sense considering the Falcon just ended up going to the Resistance base anyway, but because Lor San Tekka had encrypted the map somehow, and Han knew the best place in the galaxy to find someone who could decrypt it would be Maz's castle. And then in the first scene between Snoke and Kylo Ren, Snoke had mentioned that even though they had gotten away, they were still able to track the Millennium Falcon, and it was now Kylo's task to get the map back from his father. And then during the First Order's attack on Maz's castle, when Kylo Ren is carrying Rey back to his shuttle, Han could have confronted his son instead of just standing there watching him. Furthermore, he could have pleaded with him to let her go and to give this all up, showing just how concerned he was for his son. He could have even gone on to remind Ben how happy he was as a child, how happy they all were as a family. Kylo could have then told Han that he doesn't understand the power of the dark side, or why he has to do what he's doing. Han could then argue that he doesn't have to do any of this, that Snoke is just using him for his power, which angers Kylo, and he drops Rey and ignites his saber and strides towards Han, who holds his ground, albeit a little nervously. Kylo then raises his saber like he's going to strike down Han, but he can't bring himself to do it, and instead just gives him a good solid force push. That's when he says quietly to himself that, "You're wrong, father, Snoke is not the one I serve." He then scoops up Rey, gets on his shuttle, and flies off. And this scene could then be followed up by the scene of Kylo talking to Vader's melted helmet, telling his grandfather how he feels it again, the pull to the light. And thus we would then have a good idea of who Kylo is truly serving, or at least who he believes he's serving. And we could also be left wondering, is he really talking to some aspect of Darth Vader in that scene? And then in the end, it can be Han's idea, not Leia, to go back and try to reason with Ben one last time. That he knows he can bring him home, that if Ben wanted to, he could have already killed him. And then in their final meeting, maybe not put them on a railingless bridge and telegraph how the whole thing is going to end. Maybe, just maybe, some of us would have actually thought, maybe Han can bring his son back to the light, and then been surprised when Kylo turned on him at the last moment and killed him. Now, I'm not really going to touch too much on Leia's character here, but with the recent passing of Carrie Fisher, it's pretty safe to assume that her character likely won't get much of a happy ending either, which is a very sad and unfortunate fate. I had heard that originally she had a big part to play in Episode 9, but now I'd be surprised if something doesn't happen to her character between Episode 8 and 9, and we simply read about her fate in the opening crawl of Episode 9. And then there's of course Luke, our only hope to get some type of happy ending for one of the big three characters. Now, personally, I think Lucasfilm was so worried about what to do with the character of Luke Skywalker, how to make his story intriguing, that they ended up overthinking things, and may have done something that a lot of fans might not end up liking or even agreeing with. I think they may have forgotten that Luke's journey through the original trilogy was already pretty intriguing and emotionally impactful, and had he just continued to grow from that point and become a better and more powerful Jedi, people would have been just fine with that. Instead, they've most likely made him a broken man who has done the one thing he would never do, turn his back on his friends. And I think this is exactly what Mark Hamill was upset about when he said in an interview that he fundamentally disagrees with the direction his character takes in Episode 8, because Luke's greatest strength, and indeed what allowed him to save his father in the end, was what the Emperor had said was his greatest weakness, his faith in his friends. Now it seems he may have turned his back on his friends and his family, and even thinks that the Jedi themselves need to end. And again, not knowing how this is all going to play out, it seems like a very odd direction to take with the greatest hero of the Star Wars universe. Now personally, I would have loved it if it had been Luke that sought out Rey towards the end of the movie, not the other way around. And instead of Rey defeating Kylo Ren by channeling the Force, or whatever she did, Kylo would have been victorious and disarmed her and then given her the choice to join him or be destroyed by him. Rey says she'll never join him and calls him a monster again, so Kylo takes up Anakin's old blue saber and is about to strike her down and says something about how this didn't belong to you. As he swings it at her, the saber gets pulled from his hand and into the hands of Luke, who says that it doesn't belong to you either, Ben. Luke could then go on to plead with Kylo Ren for a bit about how he should give up the dark path and come back home, that it's not too late for him. But Kylo will tell Luke that he is now immune to the light and attacks him. But Luke simply uses the Force to stop him and says, "I will not fight you." Kylo again tries to attack him and again is simply repelled by Luke using the Force. And that's when the ground splits open and everyone is forced to make their escape before the planet blows up. We then go back to the Resistance base, and Luke and Leia can mourn the loss of Han together with Chewbacca. We can then have a scene between Luke and Rey where she says that she thought the Jedi were a myth, and Luke will tell her that they aren't yet, but they may soon be, unless he can find a new apprentice. Rey will get the hint, but tell him that she's nothing special, to which Luke could reply, "Neither was I or my father before me, nor were any Jedi before us, and yet the Force chose us, as it has now chosen you." Eventually, Rey agrees, and they go to the first Jedi Temple, and the movie ends with a scene where Luke and Leia are watching Rey train from a distance, and Leia asks her brother, "I trust you found the answers you were looking for here." Luke will nod. "Some, and some I wasn't looking for." Leia looks confused but will simply ask, "And what about Ben?" Luke responds, I know what Snoke is now, and how to defeat him, and how to save Ben. They're both quiet for a moment, still watching Rey, when Leia says, she's the key, isn't she, to all of this? Luke nods, she is. Leia will finally ask, who is she? And Luke's response to that can be anything from, I don't know, to, she's my daughter, or something more mysterious like, this is something she is about to learn herself. Whatever it is, this is where the movie could end. Now, it's fun to play what if or what could have been, but the simple fact of the matter is, this isn't how it went. But my point is, they could have tweaked the story just a little bit, and then kept the integrity of our beloved characters intact, and still made for, what I think anyway, would have been a good story, and left us with plenty of mystery for the rest of the trilogy. Personally, I just don't understand the decision to undo the growth of the original characters, and to show that, in 30 years, they'd all gone backwards. And again, we don't know just what's up with Luke, but unless Lucasfilm and Mark Hamill himself are playing one hell of a game of misdirection, which is certainly possible, Luke isn't going to be anything like the Jedi we thought he was going to be. But here's to hoping that by the end of this trilogy, he will be, and that not everything our beloved characters from the original trilogy became will be undone. Well, that's all I got for you this time. As I said at the start, these are just my opinions, and now it's time to share yours. Does it bother you how the original trilogy characters have been handled thus far in the new trilogy? Let me know in the comments below, and let's talk some Star Wars. Also, if you like this video, check out some of my other videos, or go ahead and subscribe. If you've already done all that, then thanks for your continued support. If you want to know when I upload new videos, hit the notification button, or just follow me on Twitter. And as always, thanks for watching.